There's Aaron. All right, so it's our pleasure today to have Dr. Bill Weintraub joining us for the Junior Investigators Network. So Bill will do a quick introduction and then start chatting with you guys. If you're muted and you want to talk, use your space bar on your keyboard, sort of as a microphone activation. And we ask, we'll try to make sure that the audio stays pretty clean. But we ask if you're not talking to mute your microphone so we avoid background noises and things. But we're recording this so that everyone knows. And I introduce you to Bill Weintraub.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. So thanks, Rob, for inviting me to give this. So can you hear me okay? You can. All right, good. So I'll talk a little bit about my background and my thoughts about career development. And I'd say developing a research career, no one's going to tell you it's easy, but it can be very satisfying. And there's no shortcuts. This is something you develop over a very long period of time, and you get better at it over time. And interestingly, you can continue to get better at it over a very long period of time. So it's not like you sort of get there and you're done. There's no getting there. It's all about the journey. So for me, I was always a quantitative person, and in college I was a physics and math major, and I found myself very unusual when I went to medical school that I had this kind of analytic background, and it actually rather served me well in medical school and beyond. And I was also always interested in public health. And sort of the larger issues in healthcare. That was not necessarily a fruitful area when I was training in the 1970s, and so I was trying to think what to do. I went into cardiology because that's what killed people, and it seemed very analytic to me. So it was an important area. And I thought that my analytic skills ultimately would serve me very well there. And there was things about cardiology that are particularly analytic, even at that time. A lot of it at that time was physiology. So my original research was pathophysiology of acute myocardial infarction. I'd have to say that was modestly successful. I did get a number of grants, including my first R01 doing that. But I never really felt that was going to lead me to considering the really kinds of big questions that I was most interested in. The other thing is it became apparent that the field was going to change, and the kind of work I was doing, sort of whole organ work, was going to be less interesting in the future, and it was going to become much more cellular. And at that time, most cellular level work was very descriptive, and I felt that my analytic background wasn't going to be very helpful to me. And so that's completely changed now. For analytic people, there's a lot of work to do with the cross-section between the cellular biology and analytic work, bioinformatics, and biophysics, and all kinds of fields that are highly analytic, which I would have, if I had started 20 or 30 years later, I probably never would have left basic work and would have delved far deeper into it. But I never regretted moving over towards epidemiology and outcomes, because I saw the analytic potential there, and also that it would address major issues. Now, there was really no such career at that time. Outcomes research as such didn't exist in the 1980s. And I was generally credited with being one of the people that started it. I did have a very good national mentor named Alvin Feinstein. Have you ever heard of him? Who's heard of Alvin Feinstein on the call? Nobody. So he was a sterling professor of epidemiology at Yale and editor of the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology, and generally credited with being the founder of the field of clinical epidemiology. But outcomes are a little different. Clinical epidemiology tends to be more a little more basic, a little more methodologic, and a little less concerned with the particulars of looking at outcomes. It also tended to people doing that historically tended to work with rather small data sets, intensely analyzed, which is what Alvin did. But nonetheless, he was extremely supportive of me. But I remember when I first met him, about 1988 or so, and he said to me, "What is this field?" And he said, "Who do you talk to?" And there's no field. And so, whoa, the founder of clinical epidemiology is saying to me, "What are you doing?" But he remained very supportive. Actually, wrote the key letter for my promotion to full professor in 1994. So you can see how long I've been at this. And little by little, I and others began to develop this field, and I started publishing papers off our database at Emory University at that time, and then I was involved in several clinical trials, especially the EAST trial and the LRT trial, and then worked very hard in the development of the National Cardiovascular Data Registry, and I'm generally credited as the person who was sort of the father or grandfather of the National Cardiovascular Data Registry, and then worked on more major trials, first Tactics, TIMI 18, and then Courage and Aim High and Sprint, and large complex comparative effectiveness studies like ACCERT. And so little by little, and so it's all little by little, and forming networks of like people who wanted to do this kind of work. I little by little learned what it takes to run a coordinating center type environment. And so definitely over a period of time, I kept adding more skill sets. I got better at really methodologic epidemiology. I had very, very good support at Emory with from some of the great methodologists in epidemiology, like Dana Flanders and David Kleinbaum. To me, Kleinbaum's book, Kleinbaum, Cooper, and Morgenstern, remains the best book of epidemiology. Epidemiologic research. That's the name of the book, and to me, it remains the best book. The only books I actually need in epidemiology for methods I find are that one and John Last's A Dictionary of Epidemiology. So I got better technically at it and developed sort of those skill sets. So it was a very, very long career development. And then I became convinced in 2005 that clinical research was leaving the university and it was going to go to large healthcare systems. And I saw the opportunity in Delaware to really study population health for the state. So I came here at that time, and worked additionally with many people here at Christiana, and then worked to first to try and get a CTSA and then our current CTR grant, which has been very successful, of course. So I've been involved in a lot of things, and I remain involved, and I remain absolutely committed to career development for young people and mentoring young people. You can't do it all yourself, and really working with young people, helping them to develop their careers, should over a period of time become one of the most important things to you, as your own career develops. Now, an important thing to think about are mistakes, and I wouldn't say it's mistakes, but I wouldn't advise anybody to do what I've done, which is largely self-taught over a very long period of time. So I think that whatever you do, make sure you get really solid methodologic training, and do not skimp on it. It's been said in medicine that you should prolong your medical adolescence. In a research career, that's even more important. Prolong your adolescence. Get really very thoroughly trained by some of the best people. The other thing is meant, and often that means, of course, for MDs getting an advanced degree besides the MD. It's also important in whatever you are. If you want to be an independent investigator, you really do need a terminal degree. So for most investigators, that's going to mean a PhD or an MD or a combination of some sort. But a master's degree alone is generally not going to be sufficient, and not be sufficient to get independent research funding. That may seem unfair or difficult, but it's in general the case. The other thing is the importance of being mentored. Now, you don't really get to select your mentees, but you do get to select your mentors. And the right mentor is absolutely critical. So, and it may not be one person, it may be several. You may have a local sort of advisor mentor, may have local content mentors, local methods mentors, national mentors. So maybe a sort of a committee of people who are there for you and will be committed to you. But it's essential. You need people to sort of help you up along the way. It's extremely difficult to sort of be the lone person out there. The mentor needs a number of characteristics that you need to look for. One, they need to be a really good person. So a mentor who's only out for themselves and is just want to get you to do work so they can expand on their own publication track record is not the right kind of person. It really needs someone who's dedicated to you, or dedicated enough to you. No one's going to be perfect that way. The other thing, of course, is methodologic expertise. If you just look for the great guy, but that person does not have the right kind of expertise, it's not going to do you much good. And then a certain amount of political skill to sort of help you navigate the difficult orders of research endeavor. Now, let me also talk a little bit about the path to research. For the basic scientists, there's been a long-standing approach that people use, going from K awards, for instance, not all exactly the same, but from K or from a foundation grant like the American Heart Association to a K award, to an R01, to a program project, to a SCORE grant. So more and more and bigger grants as you go. For clinical research, that's not so clear. Some of the grants are really very, very large, but there aren't that many of them. So if your idea is, what you want to do is you want to run a massive clinical trial like the SPRINT trial, and you're going to be in charge or for an industrial grant even bigger, and you want to be in charge of a grant that's $100 million to $400 million, well, lots of luck to you. That's a very hard thing to accomplish. And you got to work up to that slowly without as clear a path on how you get there. Nonetheless, the grant opportunities are of the same sorts: foundation, industrial, and federal, generally federal peer-reviewed grants. And of course, the federal grants are, the biggest is and will remain the NIH. There's also PCORI, which tends to be a little more patient-oriented. NIH tends to be oriented towards clinical trials and large registries. There are grants from the CDC and grants from the Agency for Health Research and Quality, and grants from CMS. So there are a lot of opportunities, and you got to be at it all the time, and you got to keep your nose to your ear to the ground, so you really keep track of what's going on. And form relationships. Those relationships across your institution, across institutions, is really critical. People will more and more work in groups. Now, it used to be, for the basic scientists of old, you had your lab, and you had a technician, and maybe you had a postdoc, and that was it. But in clinical research, that's never been the case. It's always been more team science. I think on almost everything now we're seeing more team science. So work with people. Learn to work with a lot of people. And it's actually more satisfying, I think. The scientists sitting at their desk at the computer all day, while you have one technician in the lab pouring chemicals, does not really sound so exciting compared to working with a lot of people and working on some of the biggest issues. Learn how to write well. Writing well is really critical, both grants and papers. Most people, when they start, they find it onerous and difficult. It becomes more fun over time, to where the sitting and writing, getting to sit and write a paper is actually the gravy after a research project. It's actually very satisfying. It's hard. Research career is hard. There are probably a lot of things that are harder, but this is hard enough. but no one ever said it's going to be easy, and it actually can be satisfying and satisfying over a long period of time, compared to more operational kinds of things in healthcare, whether it's administration or clinical care or what have you. Those sorts of things become repetitive. Even very fine clinicians who've done it for many years and have loved clinical medicine tell me that it's repetitive. Well, they didn't have to tell me that; I already knew it. Research keeps growing and changing, and there's lots of ways to go, and you grow and change with it. So it can be intellectually stimulating over a prolonged period of time. And then if you're good and you work hard, you'll get to answer some questions that other people really find of value, whether it's something understanding basic mechanisms, or understanding healthcare delivery, or understanding important points about therapeutics or diagnostics or what have you. You get to answer some really important questions once in a while, and that's just, when that happens, that's really just incredibly satisfying. All right, so that's my talk about why to do research and what developing a research career is like. I'll stop.
Wonderful, Bill. Thank you, Mr. Rob.
Thank you.
So now this part of the session is questions and answers and discussions with Bill about what he talked about, or about other aspects of your own career development, or if you have any questions at all, feel free to talk to Bill about them.
Hi, this is Monica. Thank you so much for that. It was very helpful. And
great, Monica.
Yeah, it really was. And I really appreciated the 3 points that you made, and finding a mentor, mostly being as far as like being a good person that has your interest at heart. Because I think probably me, as well as many other doctoral students, we found ourselves, having good mentors, but also helping them with their publications and their research and further their career. And I think that there was some feelings of isolation there instead of working as a team. But it was a learning experience, and I did learn a lot as far as being independent. But I also, to your point, you can't really do it by yourself, and you have to work as a team, and everyone can't know everything. And I have had exposure to a lot of different types of quantitative methods in my pre-doc and postdoctoral training. I'm working with databases as well, specifically the National Trauma Database. And eventually I'd like to apply for a grant and try to look at different trauma-based populations retrospectively. I became interested recently in propensity scoring, and I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. I've read some papers about it, and understand the method, but I think that there's still a lot of confusion around that area for me, and I was wondering if you can talk about the benefits of propensity scoring a little bit.
Okay, so very good points and questions. Let me say something about mentoring. For mentors, when mentoring the mentors, the thing to tell a mentor and teaching them how to do it is that they should expect nothing back. Mentoring is pure giving. And the satisfaction in that is seeing other people's careers take off. Now, when someone is working with you and you're in their research area or their lab, and you're working on it, but they're getting some of the credit, they're the last author, things like that. You're really more of a postdoc or research associate. That to me is not truly being mentored. Now, you can learn a lot from that person. That person may have sort of some mentoring characteristics for you, but to me, I'm always troubled by that. To me, it's not the real deal. So, I'm not saying you didn't benefit. You may have benefited tremendously, but there should be people as your career develops who are truly just there for you, period. That's what really being a mentor is. Now, Rob's thought a lot about this, and he might want to reflect on that as well before I talk about propensity methods.
Yeah, it's a great point. We as a community, I think, are grasping better what it means to be a mentor and how you both support the fellow in their development and also make sure that the trajectory of the project continues.
Sure.
But it's challenging,
yeah.
And it's difficult, especially for young investigators like the folks on the phone here, to figure out how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the key things I think to talk to mentors about, and so you can talk to me, and there's other people in the network, and we're getting more organized around this mentoring the mentor program that we've been kicking around and we're launching formally this fall. Is, well, how do I do that? Because you, especially as a young investigator, you have to watch out for your career. You know,
Sure.
if you get a grant and you can't renew it, then you can't train anybody else and you can't make the impact. But you do have to balance that with people that are coming into the lab. And it's a good conversation to have. Finding that person, I think along the way, you know, I've been doing this a lot longer than you.
Mm-hmm.
You find people and you keep.
But he hasn't been doing it as long as me.
No, I didn't mean to imply that, but that's definitely true.
Mm-hmm.
But along the way, you find people, and you just have to keep in touch with them and know who they are. It's, you know, it's challenging. It's kind of ad hoc the way things happen in Delaware. But the CTR, and as we move forward with the CTR, is making that kind of program and making sure that people who are interested in clinical and translational research get the guidance and direction that they really need. Yeah, right. I can't comment on propensity.
but I can.
Yeah.
All right. So propensity scores are used most commonly, not always, but most commonly for non-randomized comparisons of therapy. Now, you have a number of ways of dealing with non-randomized comparisons of therapy, and the fundamental problem with non-randomized comparisons is treatment selection bias. That is, there's reason one gets into one arm rather than the other, and that's the important point about randomization. Why randomized trials are so important, because randomized trials are really the only way to overcome treatment selection bias. Now, convincingly overcome it. Now, there are a number of non-randomized approaches that people have used. One is just to look at very, very well-defined, very specific subgroups. Another is to use just straight multivariate analysis, in which the treatment is just one more covariate. And then there are propensity score methods, and I'll come back to some of the ways that are used. And then there are instrumental variables. Now, an instrumental variable is a variable that does not predict outcome, but cleanly separates the group. So, Monica, what is the perfect instrumental variable?
As far as an outcome?
Yeah, perfect instrumental variable.
Survival, mortality?
No, that's an endpoint, not something that separates groups but does not predict outcome. There is a perfect instrumental variable.
I don't know.
It's called randomization.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because it clearly separates groups, but by itself does not predict outcome.
All right.
The problem is it's very hard to develop on other instrumental variables. When it's been done successfully, it can be striking. And I give a talk about this frequently, and I'll be giving one at Penn and one at MUSC on just this subject. And I include within that talk one example of a really successful instrumental variable. And what these folks did, and included Neil Wimmer, who's actually the first author, who's here at Christiana, and he published it in Journal of the American College of Cardiology. He took people within the National Cardiovascular Data Registry, and he wanted to look about whether you could reduce access site bleeding by using a closure device as opposed to manual compression, because you put catheters in the groin, you can get bleeding. And you would say, well, you should do that with randomization. But the problem is that the randomized trials for closure devices have been very small, not big enough to look at the bleeding issue. So how would you do it then? Well, it turns out that some docs use manual compression almost all the time, and some docs use closure devices almost all the time. And there isn't too much difference between those docs otherwise. Well, that's an instrumental variable. It separates the groups, but does not predict outcome. So then he looked at bleeding and found that there was less bleeding in the group with the closure devices. Well, you could say, well, maybe those patients are different. But then what he did is he looked at non-access site bleeding and found there was no difference. That's what's called a nullification variable or falsification variable. So that to me was a very successful, really very successful, very clever paper. So let me go back now to propensity scores, which are used much more commonly than instrumental variables for non-randomized comparisons of therapy. What you do with the propensity variable is you consider two forms of therapy. And you might want to look at the paper I wrote on this that was in the New England Journal in 2012 from the ACCEL study in which we did that. And I think we developed the methods in that about as well as anybody. And it's often actually used in courses on comparative effectiveness analysis. And so what we did is we compared outcomes of percutaneous coronary intervention and coronary surgery to look at mortality. And we took these large databases and we hooked them up to the Medicare 100% denominator file for outcomes. So that's our database. But then we had patients that are very different. So we developed a propensity score for the probability that a patient would get CABG rather than get PCI. And that propensity score was developed by using logistic regression. Now, what do you do with this propensity score? And there are four ways that they're used. One is to look at subgroups by propensity score. So that gets back to well-defined subgroups. Another way of doing it is to put the propensity score in as one more covariate in a multivariate analysis. My problem with that approach is unless you have variables in the propensity score that weren't in the multivariate analysis, it doesn't add anything. It just adds an extra step. Another way is to use what's called propensity matching. You take the probability of one form of therapy, one versus the other, and you just match patients, generally 1-to-1, but it doesn't have to be 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1. But you match from the propensity for one form of therapy versus the other. There was a time that maybe 15 years ago, the journals just loved that. The journals were full of papers on propensity score. But I don't, you got me doing a lecture on comparative effectiveness rather than on career development. So I'll be finished with this soon.
Okay.
So the journals love that because when you did propensity matching, it looked like a randomized trial. You look at these groups and they just variable after variable, they look exactly the same. It looks great. And then one of the problems with that is you tend to lose patients because not everybody matches. And then the final way is called inverse probability weighting, in which you weight the probability for one form of therapy versus another, and with that you can sort of slide the patients and make them all look the same. You don't lose any data. And then there are what's called double robust methods, in which you sort of combine multivariate analysis and propensity matching. And you can dream up these new methods up the wazoo. The problem is always the same, that you can't correct for variables you don't measure. And that is the fundamental limitation. So one of the things I show is when you have a difference between propensity matched and randomized trials, even if you have a lot more patients in the observational data than the randomized trials will trump the observational data because you overcome treatment selection bias. So I actually think that you ever hear of Sturgeons Law? You've heard of Murphy's Law, but there's one called Sturgeons Law, which I really like. Sturgeons Law is 90% of everything is crap.
That's a good life philosophy.
Right? And so 90% of non-randomized comparisons of therapy are crap. They follow Sturgeons Law. Maybe higher than that, maybe 95%. So
Okay.
be careful.
All right.
And if you're going to use those kinds of methods and you're going to make strong statements, be sure to convince yourself that the methods really that you've accounted for treatment selection bias, and that there really isn't that much left. There isn't reason to think that people are choosing one form of therapy versus another. Now, my ACCEL study, we flat out said we thought there was remaining treatment selection bias, and the interventionalists and the cardiac surgeons, they were fighting it out tooth and nail. I mean, I was the one sitting in the middle, and they were throwing stuff at each other, and I'm going, come on now, boys and girls, play nice in the sandbox. But they were fighting it out. But basically, I came down on the side of the interventionalists. You really we could do a great study, but at the end of the day, you really can't say that you overcome treatment selection bias. We just push the methods to the absolute max that exists, which was pretty cool. But you can't account for what you don't measure. Now, for instance, in CABG versus PCI, what did we not measure? So we didn't measure frailty, and frailty, people don't like to operate on people who are really frail, and frailty predicts outcome. So that's a confounding variable. So anyway, all right. So let me back off off of this and say why all of this is really important. And in your career development, you really got to be a good methodologist. Whatever you do. So I don't know Rob's area of research, except to know that I know in the things that he does that he's a first-class methodologist, and I think he would tell you in the things that I do that I'm a first-class methodologist, and that is critical. Especially as you grow up in this, if you're not seen as on top of the methods and understanding what you're doing in research, nobody's going to take you seriously.
Yeah.
And don't do just to do. Be sure that you're doing good work and that your methods are good and that they're going to hold up. So there's this big center at the University of Pennsylvania, which you know about, that was led by you know who it is. I'm not going to say his name, but Monica, you know who it is, who is a pharmacoepidemiologist who is now at Rutgers. And he developed this big center to do pharmacoepidemiology using non-randomized comparisons of therapy, and his research follows Sturgeons Law absolutely.
Okay.
Which is why we won't say any names.
Okay.
Right.
So we're not near. Okay.
It's great.
But I bet you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Don't say it.
Okay.
I didn't say it.
Okay.
You said something.
But you got to be right methodologically. And also another point about this is that the questions drive the methods. Don't let the methods drive the questions. Let the questions drive the methods.
That's great.
Thank you.
Along the way in there, Bill, this is Rob again. You said something perfect that you got me.
Me? Something perfect can't be.
You did one thing.
Oh, okay, only one.
But it's pertinent to this group, and I just want to.
That's when I said that you were a good methodologist. Was that the one perfect thing?
That was the second thing. The first, I just want to point it out for the rest of the junior investigators. Bill said you got me to talk about comparative effectiveness research, and that's fine. What this group is about is that the senior investigator comes on and tells a little bit about themselves and how they got to where they are. And then they're yours. So if you have questions about their methods and, why did you go to this place or how did you make that transition, that's all open. So that was great. And thanks for pointing that out.
Oh.
I don't want to interrupt the flow. If there are other questions, there are several folks online also, or if Monica has follow-ups.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Just unmute yourself if you have questions for Bill. I know you guys are out there.
You all know me, so come on.
That's right.
Oh.
I'm pretty benign.
Yeah. Anything, questions or comments for Dr. Weintraub? Wow. Okay.
All right, well, so I'll give some last words, which are not something I haven't already said already. Listen, you should enjoy it. You should have fun. Research academics should be fun. And when it's not, there's something wrong. It's hard work. The other thing is, if you ask me that great creativity is wonderful. I've talked about a lot of stuff. Creativity is wonderful, but if you ask me, the most important qualities are resilience and persistence, and they're a little different. They're not exactly the same. Resilience is your ability to pick yourself up when you've gotten knocked down, and persistence is the ability to keep going. And it takes a lot of that. That being said, you also don't want to tilt at windmills. So when something isn't working or something isn't right, know when to redirect. And you will redirect lots of times over the course of a career, and you should. You shouldn't just say, got this one thing you're going to pursue. I remember that at my 30th reunion for medical school, one of the people who wrote in said he'd been studying some enzyme for the last 25 years. And I went, oh my God, I can't imagine anything worse than studying one enzyme for 25 years. If you couldn't answer the questions about that enzyme in 25 years, move on and do something else, anything else. But each to their own. If that made them happy, fine. But do prepare to think through and when you're going to move and when you're going to do something different.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. This was wonderful.
Right. My great pleasure.
And this will be posted. If you get contacted from other folks by email, it might be in reference to this recording. But thank you, everyone, for attending. We will let you know when the next session will be held. And as we move into the fall, there will be more announcements and connections back with the Junior Investigators Network. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns for me, just let me know. I'm happy to talk.
Yep. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Be in touch soon.